Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you. My name is Christoph Poe. I'm the Senior Program Manager at STIAS. I have the honor of doing this on behalf of Edward Chirumira, the Director of STIAS, who had to make a trip home to Uganda, an unplanned trip because unfortunately it is after the passing of his brother 2 days ago. So Edward will be involved in leading his family and the members, the children of his brother, in this very difficult time. So our thoughts go with him. Please join me in thinking of him in these days and weeks ahead. So it's a beautiful sunny autumn day with visibility of something like 35 kilometers, which is wonderful, and therefore all the more amazing that you've all showed up, all the fellows here, all the guests and visitors, welcome. We have these lectures, 3 or 4 of them in each semester, and it's an opportunity for STIAS to invite a wider audience, Stellenbosch and the rest of the Western Cape, to come and have a peek into the work of some of our fellows and engage a little bit in life at STIAS. And therefore, we're very pleased to welcome all those fellows who are here from this cohort, from other cohorts, also those who joined online, but also especially the guests and the friends and the colleagues from Stellenbosch University, from other universities in the Western Cape, and just in general, everyone who's interested in the work of our fellows. So thank you for coming and welcome. It's my pleasure to invite Professor Fasti Ruud, who will introduce our speaker today. It's become kind of a tradition at these lectures to invite a faculty member of Stellenbosch University to introduce the speaker, also to interest certain sectors or faculties of the university more in working with our fellows. So Fasti is the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences since 1st of January. She's also a professor in the Department of Philosophy, where she served as head of the Unit for Social and Political Ethics within their Center for Applied Ethics. So Fasti studied at Stellenbosch and at Radboud University in the Netherlands. Her research is on moral and political philosophy. She's written extensively on Friedrich Nietzsche and on Hannah Arendt and others, and it's also written on identity politics and on public happiness. So with that, Fasti, thank you very much.
Thank you, Christoph, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to be here, and it is a real privilege to introduce Alex Ezeh to you this afternoon. I am the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and if this is not good social science, then I don't know what is. So Alex is someone whose work has profoundly shaped how we think about population, health, and development in Africa and the global South. It is impossible to do justice to a very, very impressive career in just a few minutes, so I'm just going to pick out a few highlights. I'm sure the CV is available elsewhere. It will take you quite a number of hours to read. So Alex is a Dornsife Professor of Global Health at Drexel University, Philadelphia. He's also the founding Executive Director of the African Population and Health Research Center in Nairobi. This center has been built into one of Africa's top independent research institutions. It does pioneering work in urban health and democracy, and also provides mentorship for African scholars. Alex is Honorary Professor of Public Health at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, and is also the co-founder of CARTA, the Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa, which has supported hundreds of PhDs across the continent and strengthened African universities from within. In terms of research and publications, these have broad research focus areas in reproductive health, adolescent well-being, population dynamics, and development ethics. He's published widely, including in The Lancet, in Science, and BMJ Global Health, and he is frequently cited in policy spaces and global fora. Further evidence of his global recognition comes in the form of his service to the United Nations High-Level Advisory Board for Economic and Social Affairs. He co-chairs the second Lancet Commission on Adolescent Health and Wellbeing, and he's received numerous awards, including the George MacDonald Medal from the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene and the Social Sciences Prize from the World Academy of Sciences. We have the privilege of listening to Alex Ezeh this afternoon as he challenges the ability of dominant models of population change to explain demographic trends in Africa and other non-Western societies. We really look forward to listening to you, Alex. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Vas. It's really an honor to be here, and really thank you for your kind words. Let me start by saying, recognizing a lot of my friends that came from far to be with us here today. Tom Motry from UCT, and Caroline Sotti with the Conversation Africa. I thought she's actually in Johannesburg, but she's now in the region. And it's really a great pleasure to have you both here. I think there are many others that may be in the audience, but I'm really glad that you could be here. And also for my fellows here at STIAS, those joining online, and those that traveled from Europe to be here in person for these conversations today. So really thank you. STIAS has really been a very creative space for the mind for me. While I've been here since January, I've had the pleasure of working on many different issues. And one of the things I've worked on is as co-chair of this Lancet Commission, the second Lancet Commission on Adolescent Health and Wellbeing. This report is currently embargoed, so I'm not going to talk to you about it, and it will be presented, launched next week, Wednesday, at the World Health Assembly in Geneva. So we will be going there. I think I'm expecting one of our commissioners, who is also with the Human Sciences Research Council of South Africa, Charlene Swears, to be here today. But that's one of the things I've worked on. And beyond that is some other work that I have continued to do and think, which is really, for me, the heart of what I planned to do while here. And so it's looking at the future of population in non-Western societies. So for a start, this is 2025. And according to the UN projections of global population, there are 8.23 billion people on Earth today. When you hear that number, 8.23 billion, does it concern you? And what type of concern does it raise for you? Is that too many people? Or is that too few people? You know, traditionally, our concerns around population has been that in the rapid growth of populations. And when you think about the 8.2 billion people, today, I make the point that actually the number of people or the size of a population is an irrelevant conversation to have, because there are limited policy options on what you can do about it. What if you think there's only need for 5 billion people? Do you just kill off the other 3 billion or 3.2 billion? And if you think we can be 10 billion or 15 billion, do you just go overnight and manufacture them? So it's not a meaningful conversation to be talking about numbers in that respect. What matters is the rate at which populations are changing. And when I talk about rates at which populations are changing, it could be at rates at which they are growing or rates at which they are declining. That's really important. And in 2025, there are as many people who are concerned about negative growth of populations as those who are concerned about rapid growth of populations. And I would want to focus on this as I look at non-Western societies, and I think it is important to have some definitions of what I mean. When I talk about non-Western societies, I don't mean low and middle income countries, because there are high-income countries in almost every continent of the world, but they are not Western societies. I also don't mean the global South, because there are countries that are considered part of the global North, which are not Western societies. I also do not mean the global majority, because even in the global minority countries, there are indigenous populations that are not Western in their orientation. So when I think about Western societies, this definition of countries that originated or are heavily influenced by European and Western derived traditions is what I'm talking about. Any country that is not part of that. And here, the United Nations Sustainable Development Group actually has a collection of countries that they call the ENAS group: Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand. And when it talks about Europe, it actually excludes some countries in Eastern Europe, like Belarus, the Russian Federation, Ukraine, and several countries in that region. Also, it excludes some countries in Southern Europe, like Albania, Macedonia, Serbia, and some of those countries in that region. North America may exclude Mexico, sometimes excludes Mexico, Bermuda, and Greenland. So when I talk about non-Western societies, I mean countries other than those that are included in that traditional definition of Europe, not continental Europe, United States of America, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Are we together? Okay. So it's also important to understand demographic trajectories in non-Western societies to go back to the foundation or foundational theories of demographic change. And that's called the demographic transition theory. The demographic transition theory traces the change of societies as they move from countries that are dominated by high levels of fertility and mortality to countries that are dominated by low levels of fertility and mortality. And that particular theory has been one of the most fundamental theories in the social sciences and health sciences, and it has been applied to several other issues, like epidemiological transitions, that traces the change of societies as they move from being characterized by infectious and communicable diseases to non-infectious or degenerative diseases and injuries and all that. Or health transitions as societies move from poor health to healthier societies. More recently, it's been applied to contraceptive transitions where societies move from low levels of contraceptive use to high levels of contraceptive use. So the issues of the demographic transition theory is very important in understanding societal level changes. In this case, in population. So this is the particular framing of the demographic transition theory. What you see here is that there is, at this very level, stage one is high stationary. Birth rate is high in purple, and death rate is also very high, and population did not grow much. Then, for many different reasons, 1,000 of them you can imagine, in different contexts and in different societies and at different times, death rate started to decline. Some could say because of industrialization, education, improvements in health services, introduction of different things in different societies. It could even be culture and all that, or learning, dissemination of information and all of that. Death rate started to decline. And when death rate started to decline, it led to a very massive and rapid increase in population size. And at the same time, over time, for different other sets of reasons, birth rates started to decline as well. And when birth rate started to decline, what happens is that population growth begins to slow down. And it gets to a point in the later stages of the transition, birth rate and death rate are at very low levels. And this is the general frame of the demographic transition theory. One of the things I want you to pay attention to is this important side. Again, what I showed you before. This is the birth rate, that's the death rate, this is the growth of the population in yellow, and this is really the relationship between the birth rate and death rate just drives that change in population. What is really important to understand is the structure of the population that is associated with these stages of the transition. So the transition can be from stage 1 to 5, and within stage 1 and 2, where you have very low rates of population change and very high rapid growing population, it is characterized by what demographers call the population pyramid and the population age structure, age-sex structure, which is the distribution of the entire population by age groups, 0 to 5, 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 15, and up to 90 to 9,500 and more, is like a pyramid with a very broad base. And that broad base is very important in understanding what happens to populations. But what is really key here is to understand this structure of the population over a stage 4 and stage 5, when fertility has fallen down and mortality has gone down, that it looks more not like a pyramid anymore, but almost like a rectangle with the same similar proportions of the population in each age group, age-sex group, from 0 to 4 all the way to the high ages. So this particular structure is seen as characteristic, and it's actually, if you look at many different Western societies, they are at this stage 4 or 5 of the transition. The assumption is that all non-Western societies, that this particular model that explains societal level changes in population is universal. Every single society can be plotted on that continuum from stage 1 to stage 5. All the Western societies are really stage 4, stage 5. Non-Western societies can be anywhere between stage 1 and stage 5. It's also expected that they will all follow this path that the Western societies have been on. And the question I'm asking is, will non-Western societies actually follow this path? Does this model fit what we know now as the experiences of non-Western societies? So I provide 3 reasons or 3 factors why I believe that the experiences of non-Western societies will be very different from the experiences of Western societies. And that these 3 explanations is at the heart of the future of population in non-Western societies. If we understand these 3 concepts and factors, we can understand the path that the population issue in non-Western societies are likely to follow. The first is the role of migration. The second is the pace of fertility decline. And the third is what I've called reverse momentum for growth, or the momentum for decline. When you bring these 3 factors together, it creates a new imperative for the future of populations in non-Western societies. The data I'm using comes from the 2024 revision of the United Nations World Population Prospects. So, if you think about migration, one of the key points to note is that migration has played a very significant role in population processes in Western societies. At the time that many countries in many Western societies experienced their rapid growth of their population, was also the time that they also embarked in massive emigration to different parts of the world. And you need to walk around in the streets of Stellenbosch. Can you understand what I'm talking about? And it is there in every region of the world. But also, that has meant that Western societies generally have this history of what I'm calling multi-multi, or being pluralistic societies. And this is somewhat rooted in the colonial past. What am I saying here? There are things we can take for granted, that the son of a Kenyan immigrant can be the president of the United States, or the daughter of two immigrants can aspire for that office in the US, or the son of a Pakistani bus driver can be the mayor of London, or an Indian immigrant son can be the prime minister of Great Britain. Can you think of a Lebanese in Nigeria being the president of Nigeria? Even if you're an Igbo person, it might be very difficult for you to get to that office. Or you think of an Indian being the president of Kenya today, or an African being the president of Japan or China. Outside of Western traditions, the issue of this being pluralistic and accommodating is something that is unique and has implications on migration processes and the role it plays in the future of populations. But more importantly, immigration, which is the current thing today, and we all talk about it, is playing a different role in Western societies than in non-Western societies. Many Western societies actually use migration as a policy instrument to manage the trajectory of their populations. Case in point, Canada. So who moves and who is allowed to enter, they are not random events. They are defined by policy priorities that countries choose. The UN can define who, say, you have the right to move, but you don't necessarily have the right to enter another country. So the implications, and when we talk about migration, we think about it more in terms of the migrants and the areas of destination. We rarely think about migration with respect to the sending countries and the implications it has on those countries. I'll come to this point a bit later to clarify what I mean. But when you look at migration trajectories globally, what you see is that in this Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand group, they are net recipients of migration flows. Between now, 2025, and 2100, they will receive on average between 2.5 million and 3.2 million migrants each year. So when you take those who leave these countries to those who come into these countries, there will be a net positive difference of between 2.5 million and 3.2 million each year. If you look at the other regions of the world, whether it's Africa, Asia, or Latin America and the Caribbean, they will be losing people every year. Of course, there are countries in these regions that will be net recipients, like South Africa will be a net recipient of migrants, but many of those migrations are occurring within the region. But when you take Africa as a whole, they will lose between 644,000 people annually to over 1 million people annually. Asia is going to lose between 1.4 million to 2.4 million people every year. And this will be people who will leave the region compared to those who are coming into those regions. So migration is playing a very different role in non-Western societies today and going forward. The second point I talked about is the issue of the pace of fertility decline. The point here is that more than the level of fertility, it's actually the pace of change and the pace of decline in fertility that drives future trajectories of populations. That's not something we've paid much attention to as demographers, or we even understand. What am I saying? When you think about the pace of fertility decline, what do I mean? Every single country, you can actually map out when in time their population was at the highest recorded peak. And in many places, it could be anywhere between 4.4 children in France in the 1700s to maybe 6.87 children per woman. From that point to the time it begins to decline, and gets to the point where it is now below 2 children per woman and stays below 2 children till now. If you look at that duration of time from the peak to the time it dips below 2, how many years is that? In many Western societies, that duration is measured in centuries. In non-Western societies, it is measured in decades. And that pace of change is what changes the age structure of the population and creates a new dynamism that affects future trajectories of populations. Just to give you an example, I show 6 countries here that could be considered Western societies. You can look at it in terms of how many years it took them from the peak of their fertility, and you can see what year the fertility peaked and at what level. So in France, it peaked in 1760 at 4.4 children per woman. It dropped below 2 children per woman in 1980 and has remained consistently below 2.0 children per woman since 1980. So it took France 220 years to move from the peak of its fertility to below replacement level fertility. In Canada, it took 112 years. But look at some of the non-Western societies that have achieved below replacement level fertility. In a place like Hong Kong, it took 18 years. So what happens when fertility drops very fast? To understand that implication, we go back to the population pyramid, which is the age and sex structure of the population. If you look at this, and you look at the age group 10 to 14, the age group 10 to 14 will be the group of women, for instance, who over the next 5 years will become 15 to 19, which will then be the people that will be coming into the group of childbearing age women. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you compare that number, it's about 13% of the population. You compare them to 45 to 49, which is about 3% of the population. It means that in the next 5 years, about 3% of the population will leave the childbearing age, and another 13% will enter the childbearing age. So the number of women giving birth will continue to increase. And even though fertility is declining, the increase in the number of women giving birth will offset the decrease in fertility. And when fertility declines very slowly over a very long period of time, it does not create a structural change in the age structure of the population. And that's what we call momentum for growth. It creates an internal momentum that drives future growth in that population. So over time, as fertility drops, the population still continues to grow. Now, what happens when fertility drops within a 2-3 decade period? What happens is that this base dips, gets below the 0 to 4 population, becomes smaller than 5 to 9. And when that dip occurs, it is repeated and continues, and over a 30-year period, you have a new age structure of the population that creates an inherent mechanism of momentum for decline. And that's the third point that we want to face. So what does that mean for these same populations? So you can look at the population in 2025, which is today, and look what it will be in 2100. You can look at the change in the size of that population. So for many of the Western societies, like Australia, they will actually grow by almost 60% between now and 2100. Canada will grow by about 34%. The country like Germany will decline by about 16%, even though their fertility is below replacement level. But look at the other countries in the non-Western societies. Hong Kong, the population will drop by about 72%. The number of women of childbearing age will drop by almost 90%. And the number of births per year by about 85%. This change that you see in the non-Western societies are consequential. And again, it is important to understand what is driving this level of change in these societies. I made a point that it is not fertility that is driving the change. And I explain here, if you look at the solid lines, green is Canada, red is Jamaica. This is 2025. Between 2025 and 2100, there's absolutely no difference between the two countries in terms of the average number of children women are having. It's between 1.3 and 1.5. So fertility is low in both countries. But look at the rate of growth of that population. This is the rate of growth. At 0 means that the population is stable. Below 0 means it is declining. Above 0 means it is growing. So Canada, even though having the same level of fertility as Jamaica, will not experience population decline. And that's why its population will grow by almost 60% between now and 2100. Jamaica, on the other hand, by 2080 to 2090 will actually be declining by 2% each year. At 2% rate of decline, the population of Jamaica will actually contract by 50% every 34 years. So what you now see, when you translate this rate of growth or rate of change of the population into the size of those populations, this is what you see in a place like Jamaica. 2025, 2.8 million people. 2100, 1.1 million people. It's almost a 70% drop in that population. In Canada, it will actually grow from 40 million to 54 million people. Again, as I said, you can look at a number of different countries in Western societies, from Australia, France, and you see this pattern of a rectangular shape of the age structure. You see the other regions, non-Western societies, you see this tapering off of the base of the pyramid. And that tapering off is creating this new dynamism of reverse momentum for growth, or the momentum for decline. And that's a major driver of the future of population in non-Western societies. I'll give you another example from Hong Kong. If you look at this, the bars are the number of women of reproductive age, 15 to 49, on the left axis. In 2010, there were 2.1 million women aged 15 to 49 in Hong Kong. That number has dropped over the last 15 years to about 1.76 million women. By the end of this century, that number will drop further to 186,000. That's about 10% of what it is now. Even if these women are having 10 times more births, which they will not be having, it will still not be enough to stop the decline in the number of births each year. Currently, they are having about 39,000 births are being born in Hong Kong this year. By 2100, it will be 5,600 births. And this is what the future of population in a place like Hong Kong relates. And I want to also underscore this point that this is not about low fertility, because the fertility in Hong Kong is actually projected to recover and to grow from about 0.73 children per woman to about 1.2 children per woman. That's a 65% increase in fertility over the next 75 years. So if it doesn't achieve this growth, you know that the projection that is there actually is the most optimistic that there will be. So let's try to bring this together and say, what are we hearing and what are we talking about here? One of the points I want to underscore is that when you think about population decline and low fertilities and all that in Western societies, we always think about it as a good thing. We are aging, living longer is positive. The things we need to worry about are about pension systems, the care economy and healthcare and all of those. We never see it as an existential threat in any way, form or shape. For non-Western societies, their low fertility is actually can be an existential threat for many of them. So it is not just about aging and the pension systems or the care economy. It's about whether these countries can actually stand as independent states. Many of the countries will decline while they are still young and poor. And where pension systems are still dominated by families and informal care. So it is not the concerns that many Western societies have today that these countries will be facing. It will affect every sector of the society. You can think about the family and the family structure. You can think about housing. In Japan today, vacant houses is one of their main social problems that they have in their cities. It will affect education. How do you organize educational systems in a country like, in a territory like Hong Kong, where today you have maybe 40,000 children born, and later you have maybe less than 6,000 children. How will the education system be organized within those? Negative net migration will only compound the pace of decline and create an existential threat for many non-Western societies. So it is important to understand that indeed, this negative growth, with the migration that we have talked about before, will actually compound whatever we have seen as the effect of the pace of fertility decline combined with the negative, the momentum for decline that will be happening in these societies. Okay. So, for some of you might be thinking, oh, the examples I have given you are just selective of few countries that are experiencing negative growth. What I try to show here is that if you look at the 297 countries and territories that are included in this database of the UN, as of 1950, 279 of them were experiencing high rates of population growth. I define high rates of population growth as a population that is growing at 0.69% per annum. At 0.69% per annum, it will take a country about 100 years to double its size. And that 100 years is a sufficient time for systems to adapt to accommodate that change. When it is growing faster than that, you can actually have some concern that it is growing fast. So as of 1950, there are 279 countries and territories that were growing fast. In 2025, that number has dropped to 158. And the number that were growing, that were declining, has increased from 6 to 71. If you go back to 2100, actually, many more countries, 199 countries, will be having negative growth. So this is the future of the population trajectory in many non-Western societies. What do we know about these trajectories? And what don't we know much about? I think one of the things we do know is that policy and programs can make a big difference in terms of helping women achieve lower fertility goals. If you put a family planning program in a village, or even in a poor rural setting, women will use family planning, and contraceptive use will go up, fertility will drop. We've seen that in many places, in Navrongo in Ghana, in Matlab in Bangladesh, in different places, we've seen that. What we don't know is what type of, whether policies and programs can make or help women who do not want to have children to have children. We don't know. We know that many of them have been very ineffective, and we'll come to that in a moment. But even if policies can make a difference, what types of policies can those be? And do we know what levels of change or increase in fertility that can help reverse the momentum for decline? How much does the fertility in Hong Kong, for instance, need to increase by in order to change and reverse the age structure so that we don't have this inbuilt momentum for decline. We need to rethink migration policies from a non-Western perspective. What do I mean? Yes, we celebrate the right to live, but not the right to enter. But we do know that the right to live is not something that is universally shared, both in Western and non-Western societies. Between 1950 and 1988, majority of the people who left Portugal were left illegally. We remember that? We know that emigration is highly contested, or has been in many countries, like in Russia, Eastern Europe, in Cuba currently, and even today in North Korea. You can't just pack your bag and leave. As many countries face this demographic future, will many of them actually be contemplating and considering policies that limit emigration, particularly of their most educated, young, productive, and reproductive age population? Would that be a policy option many will consider? We don't know. Are the projected populations, non-Western societies, too pessimistic? I think this is really a point that we need to bring home, because it's very easy to dismiss this, and this, in countries, populations will recover. If I use the example of South Korea to demonstrate that actually the United Nations have been doing these projections every 2-3 years for many years. The first time they did the projection to 2100 was in 2010, and the projected population of South Korea then was about 38 million people by 2100. Since that period, every new projection has led to a fewer and smaller size of the country, indicating that the projections are very too optimistic, and that the rate of decline is actually faster than it's being projected. Part of the reason for that is that the projection assumes a reversal in the fertility rate and a recovery. But instead of a recovery, we've seen a continued decline in fertility in South Korea. But more importantly, it does not pay attention to the age at first birth. Women are giving birth, those who have children in South Korea, at much later ages than before. And the longer it takes to start childbearing, the slower the population grows, or the faster it declines. So there are many reasons to expect that the trajectories that we are on is actually maybe worse than what is being projected to be. So what do all this mean? Whatever we take out from this presentation, I think one thing we must not do, or we must do, is to avoid emotional and irrational responses. The field of population research and policy and programs is filled with many errors and mistakes in the past. Whether it's the one-child policy in China, or the involuntary sterilization of poor women in India, across different places, the eugenics movement and all that, we've made a mess of the population programs, particularly when we think that we can control what women do and what people do with their bodies and with their lives. The mistake we can make is to think we can actually enforce these changes. We need to understand them better. We need to invest more to understanding new models of population change for non-Western societies. The current model is not capturing that change as it should. It is not relevant for many non-Western societies. And I think that discourses about negative population growth must go beyond aging and pension systems and the care economy. It must look at the consequences and drivers of this change in non-Western societies. The diversity of demographic experiences in non-Western societies calls for an honest and well-reasoned approach to address both continuing rapid growth in some regions, like West and Central Africa and some parts of South Asia, and rapid decline in other regions. Both are real challenges to these regions and countries, and we need to be able to pay attention to them in our development discourses. And there is need to invest in research to fully understand population decline in a global context. The president of South Korea once said that South Korea had spent $200 billion between 2016 and I think 2023 or so to prop up their fertility, but it achieved nothing. What was the policy? They will give cash benefit to families with children under 1 year. If you have had a child, you know that the commitments you have for a child is not just the first year of life. You have it for the next 30, 40 years of their lives. And so, what if the policy is not just about giving them cash? If you're already going to have a child, you're not going to do that because you got $5,000. That's not enough to pay for child care for 1 year. So what if the policy is actually about making childbearing compatible with professional career for women? What is about normalizing gender engagements and partnerships in child rearing between men and women? They share that responsibility. What if it is about making it less tabooed for non-married women to have children in South Korea? Are there other policy tools that could actually achieve these goals that are consistent with individual rights that could be pursued? You need research to actually test these options. Paul Mullen did a piece recently about taxing childless couples and individuals in the UK as a way to prop up the fertility in the UK. And the question is, why are they not marrying? Why are they not having children? Is it because they can't afford the type of quality of life they had growing up? They can't afford to give it to their children. That if you actually made housing more affordable and you made child care and child rearing more affordable, that many will actually choose to start a family and to have children. We need research that can actually document some of these processes and how they can work, particularly for non-Western societies. So I think the future of population trajectory in non-Western societies, I hope you will agree with me, will be and will continue to be very different from the experiences of Western societies. And we need to understand it better and have a better approach to how we manage it within this complex society. Thank you.
Alex, that was very insightful and revealing, and perhaps this reveals my naivety, but the concept momentum for decline is something that I simply didn't understand before. So more likely it's just the brilliance in the way in which it was presented, and the fact that understanding population and demographics from a non-Western perspective is not well known, and is critically important to understand better in all the ways that you explained and more. Thank you very much. We'll take questions from the room here. I see some hands already. I was wondering whether some of the students who entered, who joined with us, wanted to start off with the questions and answers. Let's see. I'll give you a minute to think about it. Otherwise, we'll ask our Kepa to get us going. Thanks.
So Alex, thank you so much. That was really insightful and thought-provoking as well. And I get your main point about, rates being more important than absolute numbers and, these dynamics that is taking place. But I would like you to reflect with me a bit on a kind of longer term and wider perspective as well, which is more biological and ecological and longer term evolutionary kind of. So human beings, Homo sapiens, has been on the planet for thousands of years, right? It's been in the last 2 centuries that we've had this. So it was flat, and we've had this enormous increase in the global population. So global numbers for a finite planet, right, with finite resources, right? And not only that, but also when you look, for example, at global issues like warming, climate change, production, CO2 production, and all of that, we are sometimes concerned about the use of fossil, fuels and stuff like that. But the real orders of magnitude, contribution to to the production of CO2 is feeding this amount of people on the planet, right? And this, even if you, I mean, if I stick to your kind of take-home message that the population is gonna maybe, you know, is starting to get into that plateau. It's gonna be a lot of people to feed probably a long time, right? And there are some limitations that happen that could be related to the limit size of our planet and our effect globally in the ecology and all of that. I would like you to kind of respond to that. Yeah.
Excellent point,
Okay, thank you, Kepa. First of all, you know that the relationship between population and climate change is not linear and one-to-one. Our carbon footprint in Africa and the US are miles apart. So it's not a matter of having 8 billion or 10 billion that's the question. It's actually what we do as humans. And if you look at the history of population and part of the mistakes that we've made in the past and all that, you read the population bomb and Paul Ehrlich and others, you think India will collapse as a society. It never happened. I think when the population is growing at a reasonable rate, the change in society is able to accommodate those rates of change. What happens is that between 1950 and 2000, we had this period of rapid growth globally, where the population increased by over a 50-year period by 3.3-fold over that period, meaning that it was a shot every 22 years the population doubled. And that was not sufficient space to really innovate and create systems that can support that. But we did cope with that. And we are at a phase now where the rate of growth has actually started to slow down. And what I didn't talk about here is that actually, much of the growth that you are seeing globally, Africa will more than compensate for the global growth because there will be declines in other regions. Much of that growth will be in Africa, where about 1.5 will be 2.5 or 2.6 by 2050 and about 4.6 billion by 2100. That will be moving from about less than 20% of the population to more than 40% of the global population. And if you even just take that by itself and you say, okay, in terms of climate change, what's the carbon footprint of the average person in Africa? And is that, so for me, I think the question really is, the numbers might be important, but it is at the rate at which those numbers change that we should be paying attention. And at this point, I think for many non-Western societies, that rate of change can be challenging. And again, this is only one part of the coin. The other part is that there are also many countries in non-Western societies where the rate of change is still very fast. Like Niger is still growing, doubling every 18 to 22 years. And that's not sustainable. And I make the point, I'll be the first to make that point, that if for Africa, thinking about moving from where we are now to 4.6 billion people by 2100, it's not really a question of being, whether we are 3 billion or 4 billion or 6 billion by 2100. The question is, what type of Africans would that be? The faster we grow, the harder it is to make the necessary investments in human capital to achieve our full potential. And we don't want to have a continent filled with sick and hungry and poor people who are struggling to leave the continent. We want to have a population that is educated, that is economically productive, and they're achieving their full potential. And I think that the rate of growth in a number of countries on the continent, particularly in West and Central Africa, is still too large to achieve that level of investment in human capital. And that I am concerned about. But at the global level, when we look at it and then say, okay, population growth is the problem, it is not the problem.
Great, thank you, Kepa. Several further hands, Rebecca, Paul, Justine, and at the front here.
Thanks, Alex. That was a very impressive presentation. I'm very glad that at the very end, the men also featured. So I would like to know, is there any research about fertility rates in conjunction with men, what they contribute to changes in fertility rates?
Okay, usually the numbers of, we calculate fertility as rates per woman, but you can, and we also look at what we call, so total fertility rate is the average number. Actually, it's more complicated than that, but what it means is that if you have a female child that is born today, and that female child survives to age 15, and starts to have children at rates at which women today who are age 15 to 49 are having children, how many children would she have by the time she's 49? And that's what you actually get as your total fertility rate, is the sum of the age-specific fertility rates from 15 to 49. And it's women-dominated. We also have what we call net reproduction rate, which is how many female daughters a woman has. But for a man, I don't think we have the technology yet. Okay, unless we have trans women that also have children. And unless that's what you're talking about, but we don't have a measure that says this is the number of children per man, because even if you have 10 children per 10 children from 10 different women, if Elon Musk or whoever, you'll still be looking at it for each woman, how many children you have. Because ultimately, motherhood is understood. Fatherhood is often not, is social rather than biological. We don't always know who the father is, but you can always tell who the mother is.
Okay, thanks. Paul?
So are you saying that the men are interchangeable? Okay. I take your point overall, for the overall population. But then there is the question of kind of where the people are, and I hesitate to agree with Kepa about anything, but there is a real question of the impact of climate change on places like the Sahel in Central and Western Africa, which, I mean, Nigeria is maybe propping up lots of population, and if China's population declines and they need people to support their aging population, is China really going to facilitate that happening? The U.S. actually needs immigrants, but we're doing crazy things with them. And then there's the question of building infrastructure for those populations. But it seems to me that the impact of climate change is going to make this problem close to insoluble because of where the people are on the planet. You may be right about the overall numbers, but what's your solution for their distribution or for redistributing them?
Okay, first of all, I think the issue of population redistribution is really a concept that you don't want to push hard on. Because even at a micro level of a nation state, it's always fraught with problems. You think about Ethiopia, that there is drought in the south, and you want to move those people to a different area. You are uprooting them from the land that they have connections to. And there's never been a time that you actually moved people around at that large scale that's positive at the end. So when you think about migration, I think what I'm concerned about is whether countries will wake up tomorrow and set up policies that limit the ability of citizens to live, and particularly certain types of citizens. If we've spent all the money training you in the university and you're 22-year-old, we don't want you to leave and then start all your childbearing in another country. And labor considerations were major reasons for limiting emigration in places like Portugal and other places, and others is political. So we have to be clear what we mean by redistribution. I think what we are thinking more about is the ability to move, and the technology we have now has made it easier and possible to move around. Before, you move and that is it. You may never go back to wherever you came from. Many of the people who left Europe and came to the US never went back to Europe again. Today, you can have breakfast in Cape Town and lunch in London and dinner in another part of the world. That's where we are now, and it's become possible. The question is whether we have the political will to actually make that possible. And what type of societies and instruments are we going to put in place that will allow the people coming in to actually integrate? You go to Japan, for instance. If you're a Filipino and you've lived there 2-3 generations, you're not Japanese. So, and if you're not, then who are you? And that's part of the challenge and the problem of migration. And I also want to add a footnote here that people look at Africa and the fact that there will be massive growth in the population of Africa. Say, yeah, we have the labor force. But who tells you that Africa wants to remain the hewers of wood and drawers of water for the rest of the world? And when we don't make the investments in their education and in their health and in their human capital development, that's what we end up with. Who tells you that we want to do the job that nobody else wants to do? So those are the things we have to confront. And I think as political leaders on the continent, we need to be thinking about these things. What type of 4 billion people are we going to be on the continent?
Good, thanks. Before we go to Justine, I just wanted to mention for the online audience, please do add your comments in the chat section. We won't look at those in the session here, but we can always get a transcript of the online chat to Alex to consider later. So thanks. Next is Justine.
Thanks very much, Alex. You mentioned being careful in how we talk about migration and moving populations around. I also think people need to be very careful in how they talk about women and their fertility. It's very clear from all of the programs I know where fertility has reduced that asking women to produce more babies is something they don't want to do. For the first time in human history, women have been emancipated from the social obligations of having babies. We don't want it. And I think that that needs to be considered in all of these arguments, and I can see some women nodding with me. So to offend women, demographers talk about women having more babies. So I think a good strategy is to not talk about women having more babies, but rather to think about solutions that go beyond women having more babies. When one is a demographer, just like when one is a doctor, you only see solutions that fit into your own field. If you're a screw, everything is a screwdriver. So I think we need to solve this solution using, as you're alluding to in your response to the last comment, other thoughts. And I'd like to hear more on that from you, going beyond women having more babies. Also, as Keba pointed out well, and Paul, climate change is a real issue. You have rightly pointed out that people in Africa don't contribute a substantial burden to climate change at the moment. As soon as people transition to a higher income society, their use of fossil fuels increase. So I don't think we can judge that based on current use of fossil fuels. So those are my two questions to you. Do you really think if African societies transition to high-income societies, their use of fossil fuels is going to remain as it is now, firstly? And secondly, do you really think you can, or one can, encourage women to have more children?
Okay. Thank you. I think those are very important questions. And the issue of the fossil fuel, I think the easy answer is to say that, you know, we are blessed in Africa with almost 16 hours of sunlight every day. If we want to create more green energy, there is no better place you can do it than here. And the reason we are not doing it is more political than economic. And I think that if we get wealthier and that we do not need to rely on fossil fuel, we can actually create better energy sources that will be renewable and could support the needs that we have. We can leap over many generations of energy systems and all that. So I think the important thing, I keep reminding myself of a conversation I had with a South Korean demographer when they hosted the International Population Conference in Busan many years ago. He said, look, growing up, there is a river in Seoul that river was so dirty. You can't even play in it. It was so polluted. But now you can actually take water from there and drink. That it has been, we have become rich and we've been able to deal with all the environmental problems and challenges that we have. I think we cannot say Africa cannot grow, develop, because they will become net consumers of, it will add to the climate crisis and all that. We have no option but to develop. The question is, how can we do it in a way that is also sustainable? And I think we have the platform to be able to do that. In terms of women or having children, I think if you listen to what I said is that we must not repeat the mistakes of the past, where we feel that the battlefield is the woman's body. And honestly, we are tipping towards that. In some countries, and I think of China and many other countries that are really thinking, even the US may be moving in that direction, as we had in our fellows conversation and groups, where you're taking out certain types of family planning programs off the shelf so that they are not accessible to people. And there are policy tools that they can, but each of those can create this resistance to, if this is what the politics is pushing me to do, then I'm not going to do that. But actually, there might be women who still want to have children, but they are constrained by the cost of doing that, whether it's the social cost in terms of foregone jobs, like the case might be in South Korea, for instance, or the care and support they need to be able to support those children. And part of the policy instruments could be, how do we create enabling environments for those who want to have children, to have them and support those children to adulthood. And I think those conversations are legitimate, and we can have both of those. I don't think it's a time to say, okay, you must marry, you must have children, and that rhetoric will come back, but I think it's the wrong approach to addressing the population question in the non-Western societies that are facing this challenge. The key points, I think, and levers they have will be to see, how do you create enabling environments for young people to want to stay behind and do their work in their countries, have their children in their countries, support the systems and all of those to grow. And I think that's a much better approach, because if you're not losing all of them in their troves, then you have the chance to actually recover and be able to manage the rate of decline in those populations. That's
great. Thanks, Justine. Yeah, next was at the front here. Are you sure? If it comes back, please don't hesitate. Who did you spot, Alex? Was that at the back?
Yes,
okay.
Second.
I think at the back, yes. And then I've seen Simon and next to you, yes.
Thank you so much. I'm also going to just hop on to this climate change talk. But also I want to maybe sound quite nihilistic and say, is it a bad thing that the human population is declining? And I sometimes just struggle with how much we as people fight so much to be alive, like for generations and generations to come. Like, I understand the importance of the existence of mankind, but also at this stage, we're already such an invasive species to the planet, and then to add on to climate change, with the climate just physically not being able to sustain us, and yet we still want to grow and maintain our populations that are already too much. Like, maybe this is more of a philosophical and personal question that I probably should answer myself, but what is the point? Why are we trying to increase our population to the point where in an already troubled environment, we literally won't be able to survive. Like, the planet cannot house us for much longer, but any more of us anyway. And then just again on the migration that takes place because of climate change, which has very little to do with political and economic thrive. Like, people are not moving because, they're seeking a better life in these new countries that they're going to, but they're literally moving because of the fact that they don't have a place to stay. And that obviously warps a lot of the numbers and the projections that, or maybe you did account for them in some of your projections, but I do feel like climate you're a demographer, yeah, sometimes underestimates the implication that climate change is going to have in terms of creating a livable environment for people to live in. And often at times, political and economic situations are considered heavily in terms of how the population will turn out 100 years from now, and the consideration of climate change and what it's going to do to our living environments is very, very ill-considered. So, yeah, I don't know if I don't know how to channel this comment into a question, but I think I want to ask, what is the reason for wanting our population to increase the way that is? I think we should just succumb to our circumstances, allow things to happen so that maybe our planet can survive a little bit longer, and then in that turn, we might be able to feel more capacitated to grow our population. But if we're just investing in having more babies and poor women need to have 4 children now, it just doesn't seem like it could work. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, and I can't agree with you more on that, because I'm in the presentation, I hope I didn't come across as saying that we need women to have more children. That's not what my presentation is about. What I'm talking about is that, actually, if you think about it, why would the countries with very high carbon footprint be the ones growing, and those with very low carbon footprints are the ones declining? I mean, if you look at it, then that dynamics in itself actually puts this whole conversation of population climate change conversations upside down. We should be looking at those societies declining where they have very high carbon footprint, and not necessarily. I mean, so why would the US grow by 25%, for instance, and Jamaica would drop by 65%? So what I'm looking at here is not that these populations need to grow, but recognize the rate of decline in these populations will be faster than is being projected, and will be consequential, and will be different from the experiences of Western societies that have the same levels of fertility as they do. Because there are these other dynamics that's going on in these countries that is keeping their population shrinking over time. And that's really recognizing that. And then what we do with it is a different question. But I think it is important to recognize that saying that is not saying that women should have more children. And it's not saying we need more people. It's just saying we need to recognize this is the trajectory we are on, and what does it mean for many of these countries.
Very good, thank you. Yes?
Possibly to be a little more heretical than the last speaker. I'm a photographer. And I think one has to look at the concerns about population growth in a long durée, in a long history of how they emerged post the Second World War in a fear of communism, where it inverted a relationship which said that development would lead to population decline, slowing of population growth. And instead, the argument was inverted in the early 1950s to say that by changing population growth, one could affect global development. And that was then reversed again in the mid-1990s at the Cairo Population Conference, which said countries should not target population growth rates. They should capacitate women to have the children they want to have, whether that is whatever number that is. But going beyond that, the point about this is that the ability to affect population growth, as you mentioned at the very start, is very limited. One can't exterminate populations, or one shouldn't exterminate populations. One can't forcibly migrate populations. And so only other lever is on the birth rate. And the way that you can affect that is either through what would be called duress, i.e. the China one-child policy, you are going to have so many children, or through creating regularity, allowing to create the conditions under which women can have the children they want to have, which might be fewer children or might be more children. In the context of that, for me, as a demographer, questions about what the population of the world is going to be in 2100 are largely irrelevant and redundant. What we should rather accept is that we are going to be dealing with whatever we're going to be dealing with. You know, some countries declining very fast, some countries possibly growing, Canada growing, other countries declining. And really, what demographers can bring is to say, this is what's coming down the track. How do we respond as a society to what's coming down the track? Not whether we can avert, we can change the track. I think the track is ineluctable for the reasons I've said. So rather, what demographers can bring is a long-term insight into how populations change, and for societies to work out how to navigate and manage them. Anyway, it's a comment. You don't have to answer that.
No, but I mean, I can say a footnote on that, Tom. And you know, I mean, that's one perspective. The other perspective is also that demography is not destiny. And the fact that these things have been projected to be like this doesn't mean they will be like that. There might be other policy instruments that can actually change the course and the trajectory. And as I've said, Western societies, and I've given the example of Canada, adopt very specific migration policies that's actually working for them to affect the trajectory of their population. And that's why they continue to grow in all those. So there are things we can do that will shift those. Whether it will transform them completely is a big unknown. But you also do know that over the next 25 years, we can be very certain about the demographic processes and what they will look like. But between 2050 and 2100, there's a huge unknown. And it depends on what happens between now and 2050, because that then affects the trajectory that you're on beyond that. So yes, this is not destiny, but in many ways, for the next 25 years, we actually can tell you with great certainty what these populations would look like and what they will be.
Great, thank you, Tom. Simon?
Yes, Alex, thank you very much, and it's really challenging a number of the arguments you've made. I'm a sociologist. I've spent some time in West Africa and some time in Central Africa and had 5 doctoral students who've worked in that area. So some time back, a few of us thought we should ask the following question. If there is a 2 degrees centigrade increase by 2050 from the pre-industrial global average, what will happen to the population and to migration in West and Central Africa? And as you've already pointed out and others, I mean, it's clear that there is going to be a large increase in population according to that projection. And this is a projection on 2 degrees and a projection with regard to assumptions regarding fertility rates and so on. That's going to be my last question about the prediction rather than a projection rather than a prediction. And what we came up with is something along these lines, and I'd like to just ask you whether you would react to it. That area with that projection in terms of climate is clearly going to be the only area in the whole globe that is going to continue to have large population increases. Secondly, as a number of the demographers know, the 2 factors that influence the fertility rate, most importantly, there are many others. The first is access to contraception, which you mentioned, and the second is the education for young women beyond 7 years. And it's clear from the people I've spoken about in these 2 areas that both of those factors are going to become important influences very soon in ECOWAS and in the Central African. In other words, the 2 factors of many, but the 2 most influential factors are going to come into operation if and they already started to, which means that young women in those areas are going to be able to have more control over their bodies and going to be able to have access to contraception. However, there is a lagging effect, and the lagging effect is it takes 20 years for the implementation of this to actually make a difference to the population. So it looks like the population is going to increase, but with these factors, by 2050, it's going to start, let's say, what is the word? It's going to start...
plateau.
Okay, so, I mean, I'd like to know what you would say about that. The second is, with regard to the population and migration statistics you've given us for the next 25 or 75 years, and those are projections, they're not predictions. What assumptions were made by those who made those projections regarding population, regarding climate change? Because it would seem to me that if one is going to make a projection, as you've heard from a number of other people here, if those institutions make these projections, what kind of assumptions are being made regarding the issue which is everyone's raising, climate change. So my two questions. First of all, I felt challenged by your presentation to us. The second is, do you think that this projection with regard to Central Africa, West Africa, that you're going to have an increase in population, it's going to reach a maximum sometime in 2050, and if we make this prediction of 2% above pre-industrial, that you're going to have a migration issue, and most of the migrants are going to leave their rural areas and go to their urban areas rather than leaving, because a migrant would like to stay close to where the extended family is. That kind of view would be an interesting case study for you within your presentation. And the second is, what assumptions are made in the projections that you use for population regarding climate change? Thank you. Sorry about my long question.
No, thank you, Simon. And on the first part, I think apart from West and Central Africa, there are other countries and maybe not necessarily regions that will also continue to experience rapid growth of their population. You think about within South Asia, Afghanistan, and will continue to grow. Actually, by 2100, if you look at the countries with the highest rates of growth of their population, half of them will be in the Gulf states. It will be Qatar, Kuwait, and some of those countries. And in West Africa, a lot of the countries also in West Africa will be growing fast. But the thing is this. I think in West and Central Africa, to a less extent, we actually have a different dynamics that should be concerning for many of us, that may actually affect the impact of some of the factors you talked about with female education and urbanization and all of those, reducing the rate of growth of the population. We've seen this in many parts of the world, in Latin America and the Caribbean and in Asia and all that as female education increased, there were this move to autonomy and reduction in family planning and increase in contraceptive use. In West and Central Africa, we're actually facing a different dynamics, particularly with the insurgents and Islamic insurgency in the region that is contending with those views. And what it is doing now is actually making it hard. I mean, you think about Boko Haram. What does, in Nigeria and part of the Sahel, what is it saying? Western education is evil. And you are having a conversation that is challenging those norms that have played roles in other regions. So the question is how well this will happen in the sub-region is contested in some ways. And I want to believe that indeed that will end soon. But am I optimistic that that is the situation? Of course, if the population continues to grow as it is growing, it will also create, as we have seen in many of the countries, the inability of the central government, it doesn't matter whether it is a military regime or a democratic regime and all that, to respond to the needs of the population. And so you will continue to have political instability because the capacity of the government to respond will be limited by the rates of growth of these populations. And then, can you actually increase the number of schools and the number of teachers and the number of healthcare workers and the number of hospitals and clinics, double them every 18 years in a place like Niger, just to maintain the current levels of poor coverage of those services? It's almost impossible. And what happens is that the provision of those services will continue to decline, creating levels of discomfort amongst the population. And they will ask questions of the leadership and all that. And so I don't know for sure that the experiences, we hope that it will be like in other regions. But there's a lot of reasons to be cautious about how much we actually think that what has worked in these other regions will actually work within West and Central African countries, particularly those that are being influenced strongly by these fundamentalist views and ideologies. In terms of climate change assumptions, I honestly don't know, but I can look at that. I think the only thing it could affect is the net migration levels, because in some countries, if they face more dramatic climate change effects, then they might lead to more movements out of that geography to other places. But at the continental level, and the numbers that I've shown of net migration flows, it will not be affected by that. But I can look into that and see what assumptions they made, but I don't really believe that they factored that in. I can check with the team at the UN Population Division to see if there's any accommodation they made with respect to climate change.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I think Lucia had a question. Purple shirt.
Thank you, Alex. What an interesting talk. I've got two questions, I think, and it alludes a little bit to what the first one, what you were just saying, maybe both do. It feels like a lot of, putting what the policy options are to one side, it feels like a lot of that debate needs to go beyond the nation state. In your experience, to what extent is that happening both within and beyond the continent? And then thinking about the content of the policies, it's quite clear that it's emotive and controversial and cultural. What are your views on how capable we are of having those debates?
Thank you, Lucia. I think those are great questions. I do agree that a lot of the issues actually go beyond the nation state. You can't think about the Sahel and think about policies in Mali without thinking about what are the consequences in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, in Niger, in Chad, and across that region. We need an approach that actually begins to bring these regions together. But in every single region, there are outliers, positive and negative. In East Africa, Tanzania is one of the countries that will continue to grow, even by 2100, above 0.69% per year. And other countries will be declining. Mauritius is already declining, and all that. So there are differences in different regions, but I think if you take a regional, at least a regional, not a continental perspective, you begin to see these patterns more clearly, and you can actually adopt policies that could work at scale, because the boundaries we have, when they were created, and you think about different ethnic groups, you have them in more than one country. You have like the Luos in Kenya, and they're in Uganda. You have the Kalenjins in different places. There is no particular ethnic group in Africa that doesn't cut between 1 or 2 countries or 3 countries. Some actually are spread across 5, 6 countries. And so having policies that then look at those higher levels than the nation state becomes very important. Your second question is, can we really have these conversations legitimately? And as I've said, part of the reason why the conversation about population has become very emotive is actually, if you look at many of the Western societies that have traditionally been OECD countries that provide aid for population programs and family planning, many of them are adopting pro-natalist policies at home. You give tax break for women if they have X number of children. You do this and you do that. And the question and the challenge has been, how do you adopt pro-natalist policies at home and support family planning programs overseas? And we've not been able to confront these conversations with data and evidence to show that actually both positions can be correct and right at the same time, because there are different dynamics happening in these different locations. And the ability to have those conversations is key to actually having a framework for moving forward. At this point, there's going to be continued polarization of ideas and of thoughts around population. And particularly, you bring climate change into that conversation, then it complicates even that conversation further. So we are in a place where it is important to have those conversations, but we actually do not have the platform to do that. And the UN, unfortunately, is not able to create that platform at this point, in my experience and engagement with them.
Alex, I think that's a great call to action on which to end this session, but not to end the conversation. So with gratitude for all the excellent questions and the wonderful conversation that we had, we can continue the conversation over some lovely snacks and a little bit of sunlight still and something to drink. So, so finally, once again, thank you very much, Alex, for the lecture.
Thank you.